Hello everyone! My mother, Grandmaster Pia Cramling, is right now playing in the Women's World Cup in Sochi, Russia. And today, in round 3 of the tournament, she played against the very strong former Women's World Champion, Russian Grandmaster Alexandra Kosteniuk. And this is the first game of the third round. They're playing 2 games in each round, so 1 game with black and 1 game with white against the same player. And this was the game that my mother played with the white pieces. So we're gonna go ahead and get it started. I'm gonna go ahead and show you what happened in the game. My mother today, she wanted, of course, to put pressure with the white pieces, and I'm sure that she wanted to go for a win, but she was quite tired from yesterday. That's something that I know. She played a huge tiebreak yesterday against Polish Grandmaster Monika Soko. She played lots of games, and you know, I think she played 4 games in total yesterday, so she was quite tired and she hadn't really had that much time to prepare against Kosteniuk for today. But this was what opening she decided to go for at the end. She decided to go for knight f3 as the first move. And when you go knight f3 as your first move as white, then you're kind of asking black, you know, what are you gonna do? And kind of playing against that. So instead of just saying, you know, I'm gonna go d4 the first move and already enter into queen's pawn kind of opening, you're trying to, you know, there's lots of openings where the knight ends up going to f3, so it's a very flexible move. But Alexandra, she decided to go for d5, and then my mother responded for d4. So this is just as if it would have been a queen's pawn opening. Queen's pawn opening. Knight f6 was played, c4, now we have a queen's gambit, e6, knight c3, just getting the pieces out. And at this point, black decided to go for bishop b4, and this is called the Ragozin. Other lines that black can go for are just to go bishop e7 and just say, you know what, we're just gonna play a little bit of a calmer game. I'm not gonna enter into all the lines of the Ragozin, all the theory, etc. But Alexandra played bishop b4, and this is very theoretical. And you know, let me tell you, I've played the Ragozin with black. I remember studying for like a year this opening, and still there was so much that I didn't know. So now I just end up playing bishop e7. But bishop b4 is a really good line that can give black a lot of play, and especially if you're, you know, kind of wanting to create some chances as black and not just going for a solid line, the Ragozin is a great opening. So there's lots of ways that white can respond to this, in more passive ways, in more aggressive ways. Bishop g5 is definitely one of the more aggressive moves that you can go for in this position, just pinning this knight. Also, one main idea that black has in these type of positions are to go knight e4 after the bishop has pinned this knight. So by going bishop g5, my mother is kind of stopping this, and this is one of the main lines to play against the Ragozin. h6 was played, and now there's lots of things that you can do. You can go bishop h4, that's one of the main moves, or take on f6, that's another one of the main moves. And the idea of taking on f6 is simply that you're forcing the queen to go out, you're stopping this knight from going to e4, and you have this next move with a tempo, which is queen a4 check. So what you're doing is basically you're saying, you know what, I'm giving away my dark square bishop for your knight, but you are left with a bad bishop on c8, which can't really go anywhere right now. And I'm going queen a4 check, forcing you as black to go knight c6 to both block the check, but also defend your bishop on b4. And you're gonna have a hard time getting out this bishop, and your pieces are a little bit clumsy. So that is kind of what you're saying as white with this opening. And e3 was played at this point just to get this bishop on f1 out. Very logical move. Castles. And now, my mother decided to go for this move rook c1. Instead of getting this bishop on f1 out by going something like bishop d3, for instance, she went rook c1, just putting some pressure on this c-file. The rook will always go to c1, but also a main idea is that if bishop takes c3, now she can take with the rook, and she doesn't have to take with the pawn anymore, kind of making her pawn structure, if she takes with the rook, a bit better, because taking with the pawn can kind of destroy white's pawn structure. So that was the idea of rook c1. And now rook d8 was played, just putting a little bit of protection onto this pawn, but also this rook on d8 is always, that's pretty much where the rook is going to want to go, because this could become a kind of semi-open file. Bishop e2 was played, just defending this knight over here and just saying, you know what, I don't want to go bishop d3 because at some point you might take on c4 and then you're going to be attacking my bishop with a tempo. And now, everybody, this is a very, very, very common idea in chess, that you're always trying to get tempos. You're always trying to kind of like be like, kind of outsmart your opponent and be like, you know what, I'm going to prove to you that the move you just made was just not necessary. Like, you're going to lose a move here. Like, I'm going to win a move from you, if that makes sense. It's just this how I think about it when I play chess. I don't know if anyone else does, but anyways, d takes c4 was played here, and the idea is that the moment that this bishop goes out, you're waiting for this bishop to go out. The moment the bishop goes out, you take on c4 because you're kind of forcing white to take with the bishop. And now we can see that this position right here is the exact same one as this, just that now black has the rook on f8, and in the position that actually happened, the rook was on d8. So actually black gained a move from first going rook d8 and waiting for this bishop to go out and then taking on c4, which is why black was playing a few, you know, a couple perhaps unnecessary moves, but useful moves if you're going for this plan. So bishop takes c4 was played here, and at this point black immediately reacted with e5. And the idea of going e5 is that, well, this king on e1 is still in the center, and you're just kind of reacting to the fact that the king hasn't castled anymore. So at this point, there are a few different choices that white has to make, and surprisingly enough, this position is more complex than what one would think. And at this point, my mother decided to take on e5, but she missed that after d takes e5, there is a really nice move, which I'm sure that she probably didn't really spot at first as taking here. Kind of, you know, it would make sense to just think that black will take back, and knight will take back, queen will take, and that's it. You're going to end up in this position. But there's actually this very interesting queen g6 move here. So you're giving away this pawn, basically. You're not capturing it yet, but you're putting pressure on g2, and because the king hasn't castled yet, the king will be in a very awkward position after something like castles and bishop h3. And this is what happened in the game. And already now we can see that black's pieces just have all of this activity, and they're just put in these amazing and productive squares. And that kind of, you know, makes one wonder what could white have done to prevent this at this point, because it seems as if all moves made up to this point were quite normal. And perhaps one idea that there could have been in this position was just to castle immediately, if you see this idea of queen g6, bishop h3. Because if you castle immediately, at first you're not really losing this pawn. After something like takes, for instance, you can just go for instance, e takes d4. Knight takes is not really possible at this point because then you take this bishop. So you aren't really losing this pawn by going castles, even though it may seem so. So something like that might have been better, but it was really difficult, if you haven't seen this, to spot that queen g6 was a move. And my mother actually said that the moment Alexandra Kosteniuk started thinking so much at this point, she was like, man, queen g6, that's going to happen now. She saw it right after she played it, but it's just a move that doesn't come to mind immediately. Castles was played by my mom, and then bishop h3. And at this point, black is immediately threatening queen takes g2. And there's a couple ways of defending it. Actually, like, there's just, you know, there are three ways of defending it. Either by going knight h4, defending the checkmate and attacking the queen. Either by going knight e1 or by going g3. But if you go g3, you're losing the rook, so you lose an exchange. So you don't really want to go for that. So knight h4 is a very logical move in these type of positions, because you're forcing the queen to stay in this file, as if the queen goes to some other file, then you're going to be able to capture this bishop. Let's say that the queen would go, you know, something super random than anything else, then you'd just be able to capture this bishop, right? So that is not possible. So queen g5 is a very logical move at this point, and then something like, for instance, either something like bishop d5 could have been played to defend over here, or something like knight e2 as well, just to at some point go ahead and bring a knight over here, or bring a knight over to f4 and just attack this bishop. And if the queen decides to take this one now, then you always have g takes h3. Are you going to be losing the h3 pawn? Yes, but you do have this pawn, and you're going to start having lots of more counter chances. Knight takes is never really possible here because of queen takes bishop. So these are some of the ideas that there are in this position. So knight h4 is probably a more active move than the move that actually was made, knight e1, which is another way of defending this pawn, but on e1 it's not really doing as much as on h4. On h4, even though it is a bit more vulnerable, it's at least creating more attacks. Knight takes e5 was played at this point, and this is a really beautiful tactical idea, everybody. And I want you to right now, we're gonna go ahead and put something on top of the little, analysis that we have right there. All right, we're gonna go ahead and put something over there right now. And I want you to tell me in the comments down below if you can spot what happens after queen takes b4. Very beautiful tactical idea, and an idea that's first a bit difficult to spot, but just a very beautiful tactical idea that's quite thematic as well. Okay, so I hope that you've solved it, and I hope that you've told me in the comments, guys. I love when you comment stuff. It makes me really happy. The idea here is knight f3 check, and this is a really interesting idea because if you go knight takes f3, then there's queen g2 checkmate, and if you go king h1 here, then you're just losing this knight. You cannot capture back because there is this checkmate, so this is just losing a piece for white. Very beautiful tactical idea. So at this point the knight can actually move to e5 because of this. Bishop e2 was played just to defend knight f3, and this was in no ways a bad move, but probably something that would have been a little bit more active would have been to go f4. And this is an idea that we're going to see throughout the whole game, that f4 is really interesting because you're actually activating your rook by going there. It's not just that you're kicking the knight away and stopping knight f3, but you're also giving potential ideas for the rook to be able to move. And now if something like, for instance, knight takes c4, you just take the bishop back, and even though it's perhaps not ideal, it's a lot better than before. Knight takes e3 is, for instance, not possible because of rook f3, threatening both the knight and this bishop. So there are lots of ideas in this position. Very interesting. Very interesting tactical ideas. But my mom opted to go for bishop e2, which is a little teeny tiny more passive. c5 was played to defend this bishop, and queen c2 was played because at this point, when you go queen c2, you are forcing black to exchange queens, and that is something that at this point my mom really wanted to do. The queen was attacking on the g file, and my mom just said, you know what, it's time to get the queen out of here. That queen is annoying. So queen c2 was played, and the queen can't really go anywhere else on the g file because if queen g5, then there's f4 winning a piece. And if the queen goes somewhere else in this, somewhere else than the g file, then we're going to be winning the bishop. So queen takes c2 was actually a first move. And now taking with the rook makes a lot of sense because if you take with the rook, then after bishop takes c3, you're also able to capture with the rook. Bishop f5 was played, e4, kicking the bishop away. Bishop e6. And at this point, this was another really important point of the game. My mom thought for a very long time here. She thought for around 20 minutes, probably because she couldn't completely figure out not that she couldn't figure out, but probably because she was just trying to find ways of defending here. And she ultimately ended up going for knight f3, which is a very logical move, just exchanging this knight. But in positions like this, a lot of times, it can be good to play actively. Typically, it's very good to play actively. The best way of defending is to attacking a bit yourself, as they usually say. So instead of knight f3, an interesting move would have been to go f4 and kick this knight away. This knight could have gone to some different places. Let's say that the knight goes back to c6, then there's f5, and all of a sudden you're starting to push a little bit here. Your rook can get out, your pieces can get out better, and you just have more space as white. And we're going to see why this just would have been so important, because after knight f3, white's pieces are very cramped. Knight c6 was played. You don't want to take here on you probably don't want to take as much on f3, because if you take on f3, you're kind of liberating white's pieces a bit. Going back to c6 just kind of keeps the pressure in the position for black, which is something that black wants to do when they're a bit better. Knight c6 was played, a3, trying to kick away the bishop. Bishop a5. And now knight d1 was played. So I think that my mother was trying to get the knight around, but knight d1 had a problem that after knight d1 there is this move knight d4, and now you actually, because you know this bishop is not defended, if the rook moves from here, you actually have to take this knight, because you know if this rook goes anywhere else, then this bishop is going to be lost. So knight takes knight was played, pawn takes knight, and now it's really important to go bishop d3 and push this pawn. But the issue is that after this position, black is going to have a long-term advantage, that this pawn on d4 is going to be a pass pawn that's going to be very dangerous. It's going to be important for black to make sure that this pawn never becomes weak or lost, but this pawn is just really controlling all of white's pieces. This knight cannot move anywhere, this bishop can't move anywhere because then it's going to be pushed, and I mean, black's bishops are just placed in perfect squares to keep this pawn pushing if they want to. So this already right here, this now it's not just, you know, like this position currently being bad, but this is actually a long-term disadvantage for white. Bishop b3 was played, kicking the rook away, and rook c5 was played, hitting the bishop. And at this point, everybody, after b6, I'm gonna ask you the second question of this video, which is, you know, let's go ahead and take away the analysis. Let's put something on top of the analysis. Maybe, you know, a great picture of my mom or something. Who knows what it's going to be, but let's put something on top of the analysis. After b6, everybody, what can white do to have as many drawing chances as possible? There's this really nice idea that maybe could have changed the whole outcome of the game. At least it would have given white a lot more drawing chances. And that is, everybody, to at this point go for rook b5. And the idea of rook b5 actually is that you're hitting this bishop, and at the same time, when this bishop moves, there's going to be this big b4 idea trapping the bishop on a5. After you go b6, this bishop on a5 is trapped. So if you go b4, you know, you're just going to be able to capture it. So the only move here is to go bishop a4 is black. Any other squares, for instance, bishop e6, you go b4 and attack the bishop, and then, you know, you're going to win it. But bishop a4, you're attacking the rook. But now you go for b4 anyways, and after bishop takes rook and bishop takes bishop, you're going to be winning this bishop, and you're going to be getting two pieces for the rook, which even though black might be still a little bit better, it's still going to give a lot more drawing chances, because it's going to be a lot easier for white to defend this pawn from pushing, and just in general to play with two minor pieces instead of one rook. Two minor pieces is considered to be better than one rook. So this little material advantage could really have changed the outcome of the game. Actually, very nice tactical idea here. And I think that what's interesting with this game is the fact that even though it's like a very, you know, positional game in a sense, there's so many tactics everywhere. Like, even though the queens are not there, and, you know, this is all about maneuvering with your rooks and pawns pushing and stuff, there's so many tactics here. Rook c8 was played at rook c6 by white, and then rook c8 by black. And at this point, you know, you gotta capture. This rook cannot go to any other good square in the c file. So rook takes rook was played, rook takes rook. And at this point, f3 was played as well. And the idea of f3 is just to give a square for the knight, so that the knight can, for example, go to f2. Now, bishop d2 was played. The idea is to go bishop c1, starting putting pressure on these pawns. We can see that the b2, a3 pawns, they're kind of weak. Black or white doesn't have any bishop to defend them. The only piece defending them is this knight, but this knight is stopping the, you know, moving out of the rook. Would have been a lot better if the pawn was on f4 since the very beginning, or f5, because that would have given more chances of the rook being able to escape somehow. Bishop d2, king f2, just trying to get the king out, and most importantly, making sure that after something like bishop c1, you can actually just go ahead and go king e2 and get your king up. Just that if bishop c2, which is a big idea of black right here, the king is defending this bishop already, and the rook can never really enter over here. a6 was played. You cannot take this pawn. If you take this pawn, then there's just going to be rook c2 and bishop d2 check. And this is just looking extremely scary to allow. So you don't really want to go for bishop takes a6. Rook f2, b5, the black pawns are just starting to push. f4 was finally played just to get a bit more space for the rook. Rook e8, and now probably a move that probably didn't help too much out in this game. The idea of Rook e8 is just pinning this pawn. Black realized that, you know, they cannot really enter through this c file, so they tried to create some other ideas. And actually, I mean, in this position, even though it is really bad for white in the sense that all of white's pieces are very uncoordinated, it was a bit difficult to find a plan for black. Which is why another rook went to e8, and, you know, black's starting to think about newer plans. But it is actually not that easy to convert this from a better position to a win here for black. But the problem was that after rook f3, very natural moves were able to happen. Bishop d5 just immediately wins the pawn on e4 because of the pin. There's no way of defending this pawn. If you push it to e5, then there's going to be bishop takes rook. So probably rook f3 was not the optimal move. Probably something like h3, or just trying to just kind of wait around would have been a bit better, because then after something like bishop d5, this is a bishop and this is not a horse. After bishop d5, you have king f3. So rook f3 was played, bishop d5 and king f2, and now you are losing the e4 pawn, unfortunately. Bishop takes, rook takes, and g3 was played just so that this rook would be available to other sides of the board and white would be defending this one. f5 just defending this rook for the rest of eternity. h4, trying to move some pawns, perhaps trying to go for h5. King f7, and now my mom, she attempted to go with a4 just to kind of say, you know what, if you take here on a4, well, let me try to exchange some pawns over here. My mom wanted to exchange these pawns because if she gets rid of these two pawns, and these two pawns are getting rid of as well, if they exchange all of these pawns, then it's gonna be a lot harder for black to win. Black really wants to keep these pawns over here just because they're so weak, and also it's gonna give more mobility to the knight and white's pieces. So b takes a4, rook a3, a5 was played, rook takes a4, and now you can go bishop d2 because the pawn is on a5. You can go bishop d2 with the bishop just to defend this pawn. King f3, getting the king up, bishop b4. Mom tried to go for g4. She kept fighting here, which was, you know, really strong of her to keep fighting in such a difficult position. And we can see that actually this knight that went to d1 is just not really able to move. Rook e1 was played, and now the problem is that if knight f2 is played in this position, just getting the knight to the only square you can go to, then there's going to be rook e3, and after king g2, then you are just basically going to be able to start pushing the d pawn, and it's going to be very hard to stop it. You're going to be able to go rook e2, d2. It's going to be extremely hard to stop this pawn. In fact, it's probably going to be pretty impossible. So those are the issues that white has, that their pieces are so uncoordinated. Like, it's not just that white is a pawn up, but it's those are the issues that, yes, I said that right. Half of the thing was right. Okay. It's not just that white's pieces are so uncoordinated and that, you know, black is a pawn up, but it's the fact also that there's just this pawn on d3 that just is going to keep on pushing, and it's going to be an incredibly strong pawn that's going to dominate the movement of all the other pieces of white. So that is the issue that white has in this position, and the fact that the king is cut off and can't really enter, and that, you know, black's pieces are just played so perfectly does not help. So we can see how uncoordinated pieces can really make or break a game. Rook e1 was played, and my mom opted then instead to go for rook a1. But now the issue is that this knight and this rook are just completely trapped here. The knight is never going to be able to move because then the rook is taken, and the rook is never going to be able to move because then the knight is taken. So it's just this really bad, you know, position of the pieces, which makes it really hard to play this with the white pieces. So f takes g4 was played, king takes g4, d3, black was just trying to get the king further away, d3, and, you know, this pawn is just going to keep on pushing. You cannot really stop it. h5, d2, king f5, bishop e7, and at this point my mother decided to resign. And the reason why she resigned is simply just because of the fact that Now black is going to go for bishop f6. They're going to take this pawn. They're going to start pushing with this pawn. They're going to get their king up. It's just going to be absolutely impossible to stop all of black's threats, and there is really nothing that white can do. White can just move around the king maybe. So let's say that the king goes to g4, then there might be something like bishop f6, or there might even be, you know, just like a start of going king e6 and just starting to bring the king up. You can really choose whatever you can do. So white can't really do anything in this position, which ultimately led to my mother resigning there and just saying, you know what, I'm just going to save up my energy for next game. And this, of course, was sad that she lost this game, but to be honest, Kosteniuk just played so well, and probably my mother already faced some issues already in the beginning when queen g6 was played. Not that this was in any way, you know, a lot worse for white, it's just that it started placing a lot of practical difficulties in white's position. And I'm sad to see that she lost, but she does have another game tomorrow. She will be facing Kosteniuk with the black pieces tomorrow. My mother does need to win to get this to the tie breaks, and then you know, try to fight for a place in round number 4. If she draws or loses tomorrow, she is unfortunately sent home. So that is just how these knockout tournaments work. But nonetheless, I mean, it was really fun to see this game, and, you know, really fun to see a game between my mother and Kosteniuk. They've played against each other lots of times in the past, and also in these type of tournaments, in World Cups, they've played each other lots of times. So it was really great to see them play again. And yeah, I'll be back tomorrow with, you know, another analysis of how the game goes tomorrow. Tomorrow, everything, you know, is gonna be set in stone if she will go to tie breaks or not. So, you know, I'm gonna be hoping that she does that she does. But yeah, I really hope that you guys enjoyed this game and analysis of this game, that you feel like you learned something from it. That's what we're here for. I also just really wanna you know, show how the World Cup is going and how my mother's experiences are being there. She's absolutely loving being there. So